I found the dam in my creek on a Tuesday morning in March, and I knew immediately that Susan Carmichael and her band of HOA zealots had finally crossed a line they couldn't uncross. My name is Scott Henderson, and I'd lived in Willow Ridge Estates outside Boulder, Colorado, for 8 years without major incident. Sure, the HOA had sent me passive-aggressive letters about my mailbox being the wrong shade of black and my grass exceeding the permitted height by half an inch. But nothing prepared me for what I discovered that morning when I went to check on the small creek that ran through the back corner of my property. The creek itself wasn't much to look at most of the year, just a modest stream that meandered down from the foothills, crossed through my land and 2 other properties, then continued downhill through the neighborhood before eventually feeding into Boulder Creek. In spring, though, when the snowmelt came rushing down from the Rockies, it transformed into something respectable, a genuine mountain stream full of ice-cold water and occasional trout. I'd been walking my German Shepherd, Rex, along the property line when I noticed the water had stopped flowing. The creek bed on my land was reduced to muddy puddles and confused fish flopping in the shallows. Rex barked at something upstream, and I followed the dry channel up toward where it entered my property from the undeveloped common area the HOA maintained. That's where I found it. Someone had constructed a crude earthen dam about 15 feet wide and 4 feet high, complete with sandbags, clay, and what looked like half the landscaping rocks from the neighborhood's flower beds. Behind this improvised barrier, water had pooled into a murky pond about 40 feet across, flooding what had been a pleasant little meadow into a stagnant swamp. A hand-painted sign stuck in the ground near the dam read, "Future Community Reflection Pond Willow Ridge, HOA Beautification Project Susan Carmichael, President." I stood there for a long moment, watching my creek water fill this unauthorized reservoir while downstream residents went without their natural drainage. My phone was already in my hand when I heard voices approaching from the other side of the new pond. Susan Carmichael emerged from the trees, flanked by 2 other women I recognized from HOA meetings. Susan was in her early 50s, with that particular haircut that screamed, "I demand to speak to the manager," and designer athleisure, where that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her companions were Linda Fitzgerald, the HOA secretary, and Patricia Morrison, who ran the Architectural Review Committee with an iron fist. "Oh, Scott," Susan said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I see you've discovered our little improvement project. I kept my voice level, though my jaw was clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. "You dammed up a natural waterway without permits, environmental surveys, or apparently any understanding of basic hydrology." Susan waved her hand dismissively, her perfectly manicured nails catching the morning sunlight. "Don't be so dramatic. We're creating a beautiful amenity for the community. The Architectural Committee approved it unanimously." "Patricia, you mean you approved your own project?" I looked at the woman in question, who had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "The bylaws allow for community improvement initiatives," Patricia said, though she wouldn't meet my eyes. "We followed proper HOA procedures." "HOA procedures don't override state and federal water rights laws," I said, "or county regulations, or basic common sense. Where do you think this water goes when the spring runoff starts? We're 3 weeks away from peak snowmelt." Linda, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. "The dam is engineered to handle normal water flow. We consulted with someone." "Who?" "Someone with an actual engineering degree, or Susan's cousin who took a geology class in college." Susan's expression hardened. "I don't appreciate your tone, Scott. This project will increase all our property values. You should be thanking us. Thanking you. You've cut off the water flow to my property and everyone downstream. Do you have any idea what happens when you block a creek that carries snowmelt from the mountains? It creates a lovely pond, Susan said smugly. Which brings me to the second reason we're here. We need to access your property to complete the landscaping around the pond's edges. We'll be bringing in native plants and maybe some decorative stones. I actually laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. You want to access my property to landscape around the illegal dam you built on HOA common land without consulting the affected homeowners. That's not happening. The HOA bylaws grant us easement rights for community improvement projects. Susan pulled out her phone, scrolling through what I assumed were the association rules. Section 12, Paragraph 4. Section 12, Paragraph 4 allows for maintenance access to shared utilities, I said. I'd read those bylaws cover to cover when I bought the house. It doesn't give you carte blanche to redirect natural waterways. We'll see what our lawyer says about that. Susan's smile was venomous now. And while we're discussing bylaws, I noticed your fence paint is peeling in several spots. That's a violation. You'll be receiving a citation and a fine of $200 per day until it's corrected. My fence is fine. I took photos this morning. She turned her phone to show me zoomed-in images of my back fence, where admittedly a few spots of paint had weathered after the harsh winter. You have 72 hours to repaint or the daily fines begin. I wanted to argue, to point out the absolute insanity of threatening me with fence violations while she'd just built an unlicensed dam, but I knew Susan well enough to recognize a distraction tactic. She wanted me focused on the fence instead of the real problem. Do what you need to do about the fence, I said, but I'm calling the county about this dam today, and my lawyer. You do that, Susan said. But remember, Scott, we have a legal right to make improvements to common areas. The community voted to give the board discretionary power over beautification projects. You were at that meeting. You voted yes. She was technically right. 2 years ago, we'd voted to allow the board to approve minor landscaping and aesthetic improvements without requiring a full community vote for each project. But nobody had imagined they'd interpret minor landscaping as dam construction. We'll see what the county says, I repeated, then turned and headed back toward my house, Rex trotting beside me. The first call I made was to the Boulder County Land Use Department. I explained the situation to a woman named Jennifer who sounded appropriately concerned and promised to send an inspector out within the week. My second call was to my lawyer, Mike Pearson, who'd handled my home purchase and a few other minor legal matters over the years. They built a what? Mike asked after I'd explained the situation. An earthen dam, maybe 4 feet high, 15 feet across. It's completely blocking the creek that runs through several properties, including mine. And they didn't get permits. I seriously doubt it. Susan Carmichael isn't exactly known for following proper procedures. Mike was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him typing. Okay, this is potentially serious. Colorado has very specific water rights laws. You can't just redirect or impound natural waterways without proper authorization. Did you take photos? Not yet, but I will. Do that. Document everything, and I'll make some calls. If they're violating water rights statutes, this could be a criminal matter, not just civil. That got my attention. Criminal, potentially. Illegal damming of waterways, especially ones that affect multiple downstream properties, can carry significant penalties. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, we need documentation and we need to see how the county responds. After hanging up with Mike, I spent the next hour photographing the dam from every angle, the dried-up creek bed on my property, and the flooding behind the barrier. I documented the sign with Susan's name on it and took measurements as best I could. By early afternoon, I'd sent everything to Mike and posted in the neighborhood Facebook group, asking if anyone else had noticed changes in their creek flow. The responses started coming in within minutes. David Martinez, who lived 2 properties downhill from me, confirmed his section of the creek was nearly dry. So did the Hendersons, no relation, another 3 houses down. But the responses that really caught my attention came from Tom Blackwell, Karen Chen, and Mike Sullivan, who lived at the bottom of the slope near Cascade Avenue. Tom wrote, "We haven't had water in the creek for 2 days. My basement has a sump pump that relies on that seasonal flow to keep the water table down during spring. Anyone know what's going on?" Karen Chen added. "Same here. My basement corner gets seepage every spring, but the creek usually drains it away naturally. Now there's no flow and I'm seeing water staining on my foundation walls." Mike Sullivan's post was more blunt. "If someone blocked the creek, they better unblock it fast. Spring runoff is coming and I've got a finished basement with $10,000 worth of electronics down there." I replied to each of them, explaining what I'd found and what I was doing about it. The Facebook thread exploded with comments, some people supporting the beautification project, others demanding the dam be removed immediately. Susan herself chimed in around 3 p.m. with a lengthy post about her vision for the community and how short-sighted people were standing in the way of progress. That evening, I got a visit from Gary Thompson, a retired civil engineer who lived near the neighborhood entrance. He knocked on my door around 7, looking worried. "Scott, I saw your posts about the dam," he said when I invited him in. "I went up to look at it this afternoon. This is bad. I know it's illegal. It's worse than illegal. It's dangerous." Gary pulled out his phone and showed me photos he'd taken. "See how they've used sandbags and clay? That's not going to hold when the real runoff starts. We're looking at temperatures in the 60s and 70s next week. The snowpack in the high country is going to start melting fast." What happens when it fails? Depends on how it fails. If it goes all at once, you're looking at a wall of water rushing downhill. All that impounded water plus the runoff plus debris from the dam itself. It could flood every property between here and Cascade Avenue. If it fails slowly, you're still looking at flooding just over a longer period. And if they reinforce it, Gary shook his head, then you've got a permanent pond with no proper drainage system. Where does the water go? It'll saturate the ground, raise the water table, and you'll have flooding problems anyway. Plus mosquitoes, algae blooms, and potential contamination of the groundwater. Scott, this isn't just an HOA being annoying. This is a legitimate safety hazard. The county's sending an inspector. When? Within a week. That might be too late. The weather forecast shows warm weather starting this weekend. If we get a few days of sun and above freezing temperatures at elevation, the runoff could spike by early next week. I ran my hand through my hair, feeling the weight of the situation settling on my shoulders. What do? I can't just tear down the dam myself. No, but you can make a lot of noise about it. Have you contacted the state water authorities? Not yet. Do that, and maybe the local news. Nothing motivates bureaucrats like media attention. Gary left me with a list of phone numbers and agencies to contact. I spent the next 2 hours making calls, leaving messages, and sending emails. Most offices were closed for the day, but I did reach an after-hours contact at the Colorado Division of Water Resources, who took my information and promised someone would call me back first thing in the morning. Wednesday morning brought sunshine and temperatures in the low 60s, unseasonably warm for mid-March in Colorado. I was drinking coffee on my back deck, watching the sad remains of my creek when my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Mike Pearson. "I've got news," he said. "None of it good." I checked with the county and state databases. The HOA never filed for any permits related to water diversion or dam construction. They're in violation of at least 3 state statutes and several county regulations. Can they be forced to remove it? Absolutely. The question is how fast we can make that happen. I've drafted a cease and desist letter and I'm filing for an emergency injunction this morning, but we need to go through the courts, and that takes time. Gary Thompson thinks we don't have time. He says the spring runoff could cause the dam to fail within a week or two. Mike swore softly. Then we need to escalate this. I'm going to contact the county attorney's office directly and explain the safety issue. If they understand there's an imminent hazard, they might be able to force immediate remediation. Do it, I said. Whatever it takes. The rest of Wednesday passed in a blur of phone calls and growing tension. The Division of Water Resources called back and opened a formal investigation. The county inspector moved my appointment up to Friday morning, and a reporter from the Boulder Daily Camera named Jessica Reynolds reached out after seeing the Facebook discussion, asking if she could interview me about the situation. I met Jessica at a coffee shop in Boulder that afternoon. She was in her early 30s, sharp-eyed and clearly experienced at sniffing out local government dysfunction. "So let me make sure I understand this," she said, her recorder running between us. The HOA built an unauthorized dam on common property, blocking a natural creek that provides drainage for multiple homes, and they did this 3 weeks before spring runoff season. That's exactly right, and the HOA president is defending this. She claims they followed proper procedures and that it's a community improvement. Jessica made notes on her tablet. "I've covered HOA disputes before. They can get nasty, but this is the first one I've seen that could potentially cause actual property damage. There are at least 3 houses at the bottom of the hill with basements that rely on the creek for drainage," I explained. "If the runoff has nowhere to go, or if the dam fails catastrophically, those basements could flood." "Have you spoken to those homeowners?" "Through Facebook, yes." "They're worried. Would they talk to me?" I gave her Tom, Karen, and Mike's contact information. Jessica promised the story would run in Friday's paper, possibly sooner if she could get it online by Thursday evening. Thursday morning, I woke to find my fence had been spray painted with orange X marks in a dozen spots, each one accompanied by a small tag that read, "HOA violation peeling paint." The tags were dated and signed by Linda Fitzgerald in her capacity as HOA secretary. I took photos of the vandalism because that's what it was and sent them to Mike. His response was immediate and profane. "They're trying to intimidate you," he wrote. "Document everything. Don't remove the spray paint yet. We can use this." The Boulder Daily Camera's website posted Jessica's article Thursday evening under the headline, "Local HOA's unauthorized dam raises flooding concerns for downstream homes." It was thorough, fair, and damning. Jessica had interviewed me, Gary Thompson, Tom Blackwell, and Karen Chen. She'd also reached out to Susan Carmichael, who'd apparently given her a lengthy quote about hysterical neighbors and baseless fear-mongering. The article included photos of the dam, the dried creek bed, and a weather map showing the forecast for warm temperatures and the likely spike in mountain snowmelt. Gary was quoted extensively about the engineering concerns, and a water rights attorney Jessica had consulted confirmed that the dam violated multiple state regulations. By Friday morning, the story had been shared hundreds of times on social media. The county inspector, a methodical man named Robert Chen, showed up at my house at 9 a.m. sharp. "Show me this dam," he said without preamble. I led him up to the common area, where we found Susan, Linda, and Patricia already waiting. Susan had clearly dressed for the occasion, wearing a business suit that probably cost more than my truck payment and carrying a leather portfolio stuffed with papers. "Mr. Chen," she said warmly, extending her hand. "Susan Carmichael, HOA president, thank you for coming out. I think you'll find this is all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by a few neighbors who resist any change." Robert shook her hand perfunctorily, then walked past her to examine the dam. He took measurements, photographs, and water samples. He inspected the construction, the pooled water behind it, and the dried creek bed below. The whole process took about 45 minutes, during which Susan kept up a running commentary about community improvement and property values that Robert completely ignored. Finally, he turned to Susan and said, "Who authorized this construction?" "The HOA board. We have discretionary power over beautification projects in common areas." "Did you obtain permits from Boulder County?" "We weren't aware permits were necessary for a small landscaping project." "This isn't landscaping. This is water diversion and dam construction. You need permits from the county, approval from the Division of Water Resources, an environmental impact study, and consultation with downstream water rights holders." Susan's smile faltered. "I'm sure we can file for those retroactively." "No, you can't. This structure is illegal and it's creating a hazard." Robert pulled out an official-looking form and began writing. "I'm issuing a stop work order effective immediately. Additionally, you have 72 hours to remove this dam and restore natural creek flow." 72 hours. That's impossible. We'll need to hire contractors, get bids, then you should start making calls. "If this dam isn't removed by Monday at 5 p.m., the county will remove it and bill the HOA for all costs, plus penalties. You'll also be facing fines of up to $1,000 per day for every day you remain in violation." Patricia had gone pale. Linda was frantically taking notes. Susan, to her credit, maintained her composure, though I could see the fury building behind her eyes. "This is outrageous," she said. "We'll appeal this decision." "That's your right," Robert said, "but the stop work order and removal deadline stand pending any appeal. I'd also advise you to consult with a water rights attorney immediately. The State Division of Water Resources is conducting their own investigation, and they have the authority to pursue criminal charges." That got everyone's attention. Patricia actually gasped, "Criminal charges?" Linda's voice came out as a squeak. "Illegal diversion of natural waterways is a Class 2 misdemeanor in Colorado. If the state determines this dam poses a significant hazard or has damaged downstream water rights, charges are a possibility." Robert handed Susan the stop work order, gave me a copy as an affected property owner, and then spent another 20 minutes explaining the technical violations and potential consequences. By the time he left, Susan had abandoned her pleasant facade entirely. "This is your fault," she said, turning on me. "You couldn't just let the community have something nice. You had to run crying to the county. You built an illegal dam that's cutting off water to my property and endangering homes downhill," I said. "What did you think was going to happen?" "We were improving the community, creating value, but people like you only care about your own petty concerns. Preventing flood damage isn't petty." "There's not going to be any flood damage. You're just trying to sabotage our project because you've never liked me." I almost laughed at that. "Susan, I barely thought about you before you dammed my creek. This isn't personal. It's about you breaking the law. We'll see what the board has to say about this. I'm calling an emergency meeting for Sunday. And we'll be discussing your continued violations of community standards, including your vandalized fence. You mean the fence your people spray painted? I mean the fence that was already in violation of appearance standards. The spray paint just makes it more obvious. She turned and stalked off, Linda and Patricia hurrying after her. I watched them go, feeling both vindicated and uneasy. Susan wasn't going to back down easily, and she had a talent for making life difficult for anyone who crossed her. Saturday brought more warm weather and the first signs of increased creek flow in the mountains. I'd set up alerts for stream gauge data, and the readings from Boulder Creek and its tributaries showed water levels rising as snowmelt began in earnest. The dam on my creek was now holding back a pool of water nearly 50 feet across and 5 feet deep at the center. Gary Thompson came by Saturday afternoon to check the structure. He didn't like what he saw. "The water's starting to seep through the base," he said, pointing to wet patches appearing at the dam's foundation. "That clay and sandbag construction wasn't meant to hold this much pressure for this long. If it fails before they remove it, it's going to go all at once. Can we shore it up temporarily? You could, but that might make you liable if something goes wrong. Better to document it and notify everyone who might be affected. Have you warned the people downhill? I've been posting updates on Facebook. You should do more than that. Go knock on doors. Make sure Tom, Karen, and Mike know their basements are at risk." I spent Saturday evening visiting the 3 homes most likely to be affected. Tom Blackwell was a computer programmer who worked from home, a nervous guy in his late 40s with 2 kids and a wife who looked ready to kill someone when I explained the situation. "Our basement is finished," Tom's wife, Angela, said. "We've got the kids' playroom down there, storage, my craft room, if it floods." "I can't promise it will," I said. "But Gary Thompson thinks the dam might fail, and even if it doesn't, the runoff needs somewhere to go." "What are we supposed to do? Move everything out of the basement?" "That's probably smart. At minimum, get anything valuable or irreplaceable to higher ground." Karen Chen was a retired teacher who lived alone in a neat craftsman-style home. She took the news calmly, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "I knew something was wrong when the creek stopped flowing," she said. "I've lived here 20 years. I know how the water moves in spring. This is bad, isn't it?" "It could be. I'm sorry. I'm doing everything I can to force the HOA to remove the dam, but it might not happen fast enough. I'll move my photo albums and important documents upstairs tonight. Thank you for warning me, Scott." Mike Sullivan was harder to track down. He didn't answer his door Saturday evening, and his car wasn't in the driveway. I left a detailed note stuck to his front door and sent him a Facebook message, hoping he'd see it in time. The emergency HOA meeting Sunday afternoon was exactly as unpleasant as I'd anticipated. It was held in the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that usually hosted yoga classes and book clubs. About 40 homeowners showed up, which was a huge turnout for Willow Ridge. Susan called the meeting to order with her usual imperious manner, but I noticed cracks in her composure. She'd clearly spent the weekend consulting with lawyers and dealing with the fallout from Jessica's article, which had been picked up by Denver news stations and gotten significant social media attention. "Thank you all for coming," Susan began. "As I'm sure many of you are aware, there has been some unfortunate controversy regarding a community improvement project the board approved. I want to set the record straight about what actually happened." She launched into a presentation she'd clearly prepared, complete with a slideshow showing artist renderings of what the reflection pond was supposed to look like. There were images of families having picnics beside peaceful water, children safely playing on landscaped shores, and property value charts showing projected increases. This project was approved in accordance with our bylaws, Susan continued. It was meant to create a beautiful amenity that would benefit everyone in Willow Ridge. Unfortunately, one resident, who has his own history of violations and non-compliance, decided to sabotage our efforts by making false claims to county authorities. I raised my hand. Point of order. What false claims? Susan's jaw tightened. Your assertion that the dam poses a safety hazard is completely unfounded. We consulted with an expert who assured us the structure is sound. Who was this expert? Gary Thompson called out from the back of the room, a qualified professional. What kind of professional? An engineer, a hydrologist, because I'm a retired civil engineer with 40 years of experience and that dam is dangerous. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Susan tried to regain control. We had every right to build the pond. The common area belongs to the HOA, and the board has discretionary power over improvements. You don't have the right to violate state water laws, I said, standing up. The county has ordered the dam removed by Monday evening. You're going to remove it, right? The room went quiet. Susan exchanged glances with Linda and Patricia. We're exploring our legal options, Susan said finally. That's not what I asked. Are you going to comply with the county's order? We believe the order is unjust and overreaching. We're filing an appeal. An appeal doesn't stop the 72-hour deadline, Gary said. If you don't remove the dam, the county will do it for you and bill the HOA. We're aware of the county's threats. They're not threats, they're legal requirements, I said, and you're running out of time. Spring runoff is increasing. That dam could fail at any moment, and when it does, it's going to flood basements downhill. Tom Blackwell stood up. I live on Cascade Avenue. My basement is already showing water damage. If that dam fails and floods my house, I'll sue the HOA for every penny of damages. Karen Chen raised her hand. I'm in the same situation. I've lived here 20 years without flood problems. Now I'm seeing seepage in my foundation. This is unacceptable. More voices joined in, some supporting Susan, but more expressing concern about the flooding risk and the legal violations. The meeting devolved into shouting matches and accusations. Susan tried to maintain order but eventually gave up and adjourned the meeting early. I caught up with her in the parking lot as she was leaving. Susan, please, remove the dam before someone gets hurt. She turned to face me, and for a moment I saw something other than anger in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or desperation. Do you have any idea how much political capital I spent on this project? She said quietly. I've been HOA president for 6 years. I've fought to keep this community beautiful and property values high. This pond was supposed to be my legacy, something tangible that everyone could enjoy. Your legacy is going to be flooding 3 houses and getting the HOA sued into oblivion. You don't understand. If I back down on this, I'm done. The board will replace me. Everything I've built here will be gone. Better than everything you've built being literally washed away when that dam fails. She shook her head. The dam won't fail. We're having it reinforced tomorrow morning. We found a contractor who can shore it up properly. Susan, reinforcing an illegal dam doesn't make it legal. We'll deal with the legal issues, but the dam stays. She got in her Mercedes and drove away, leaving me standing in the parking lot feeling like I just watched someone drive toward a cliff they refused to acknowledge. Monday morning brought disaster, though not the kind I'd expected. I woke at 6 a.m. to the sound of heavy equipment. By the time I got dressed and reached the dam site, I found a small excavator and dump truck already at work, but they weren't removing the dam. They were making it bigger. A crew of 3 men was laying concrete blocks along the base while the excavator scooped clay and rocks to expand the structure. Susan stood supervising, along with a man in a hard hat who appeared to be directing the work. "What are you doing?" I shouted over the noise of the machinery. "Reinforcing the dam, just as I said," Susan called back. "We hired a contractor. You're supposed to be removing it. The county's deadline is 5 p.m. today. We're filing an appeal. We have the right to continue our project pending the appeal." I called Mike Pearson immediately. He answered on the second ring, sounding harried. "I know," he said before I could explain. "The HOA's lawyer filed an emergency appeal first thing this morning. They're arguing the county's order is arbitrary and exceeds its authority." "Can they do that?" "They can try. The appeal will be heard, but it won't stop the deadline. Scott, I've been coordinating with the county attorney's office. If the HOA doesn't comply by 5 p.m., the county is prepared to get a court order and have the sheriff enforce it." The sheriff. This has escalated beyond a simple code violation. The county is treating this as a public safety emergency. I spent the rest of Monday morning watching the contractor work on the dam while making increasingly frantic calls to county officials and posting updates on social media. The story had taken on a life of its own online, with local news crews showing up around noon to film the construction. Jessica Reynolds arrived with a cameraman and immediately started interviewing Susan, who'd apparently decided to lean into the media attention. I watched from a distance as Susan explained her vision for community improvement and government overreach, conveniently leaving out the parts about water rights violations and flooding risks. When Jessica finished with Susan, she came over to me. "This is insane," she said. Does she really think she can just ignore a county order? Apparently. She's convinced she's right and everyone else is wrong. Classic HOA president syndrome. I've seen it before, but never with stakes this high. Jessica gestured to her cameraman. "Can we get a statement from you?" I gave a brief interview, keeping my comments focused on the legal violations and safety concerns rather than personal attacks on Susan. I'd learned from experience that taking the high road played better in court and public opinion. The county inspector, Robert Chen, showed up around 2 p.m. with a sheriff's deputy and additional documentation. He approached Susan and her contractor, had a brief conversation I couldn't hear, and then the contractor shut down his equipment and started packing up. I walked closer to hear what was happening. "You're interfering with a legitimate construction project," Susan was saying, her voice shrill. "No, madam, I'm enforcing a lawful county order. This work stops now. We filed an appeal. Your appeal is scheduled for a hearing next week. Until then, the original order stands. You have until 5 p.m. to begin removal of this structure. That's 3 hours from now. Then I suggest you start making calls. The contractor you hired to reinforce the dam, perhaps he can remove it instead." The contractor, a stocky man in his 50s, shook his head. "Lady, I'm not touching this mess anymore. You didn't tell me there was a county order against it. I don't need that kind of trouble." He climbed into his excavator and drove off, the dump truck following behind. Susan stood there watching them go, her carefully constructed project literally falling apart around her. Linda and Patricia had arrived at some point during the commotion, and they stood nearby looking miserable. "Susan, maybe we should just remove it," Patricia said quietly. "Cut our losses." "No, we're in the right here. The county is overstepping. We'll win the appeal." "But what if we don't?" Linda asked. "The fines, the legal fees, the potential lawsuits. The HOA budget can't handle all of this. We'll figure it out. We always do." Robert Chen stepped forward. "Miss Carmichael, I need a clear answer. Will you be complying with the removal order by 5 p.m.? Susan lifted her chin defiantly. No, we will not. Then at 5:01 p.m. this matter will be turned over to the Sheriff's Department for enforcement. The HOA will be responsible for all costs associated with county-mandated removal, plus accumulating daily fines. Do you understand? I understand that Boulder County is engaging in tyrannical overreach and infringing on property rights. Robert just sighed, made a note on his clipboard, and walked away. The sheriff's deputy followed, but not before giving Susan a long, measuring look. I approached Susan once the county officials were gone. "It's not too late," I said. "Call a removal company. Get the dam down before 5. You can still avoid the worst of this." "Why do you care, Scott? This is what you wanted, isn't it? To humiliate me, to destroy what I've built." "I don't want anyone humiliated. I want the creek flowing again before the runoff peaks and people's basements flood. That's all I've ever wanted." "Then you should have supported the project from the beginning. We could have worked together to make it safe." "It was never safe, Susan. Gary Thompson explained the hydrology. You can't just dam up a mountain stream 3 weeks before spring runoff." She didn't respond, just turned and walked back to her car. Linda and Patricia followed, both looking shell-shocked. 5 p.m. came and went with no action from the HOA. At 5:30, I received a text from Mike Pearson. "County has obtained court order for immediate removal. Sheriff's Department will enforce tomorrow morning. This is going to get ugly." Tuesday morning, I woke to the sound of heavy equipment again, but this time it was a county work crew with a proper excavator, dump trucks, and a Sheriff's Department detail of 4 deputies. Robert Chen was there supervising, along with someone from the Division of Water Resources, and a woman who identified herself as an environmental compliance officer. The removal operation was efficient and professional. The excavator carefully dismantled the dam while workers contained debris and sediment. The impounded water was released in controlled stages to prevent downstream flooding. The whole process took about 4 hours. Susan showed up around 9 a.m. with her lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Richard Bradley, who immediately started threatening everyone with lawsuits. The sheriff's deputies weren't impressed. "Madam, sir, you can file whatever legal actions you want," one deputy said calmly. "But this work is proceeding under a valid court order. If you interfere, you'll be arrested for obstruction." Susan and her lawyer watched from a distance, occasionally conferring in heated whispers. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, some filming on their phones. Jessica Reynolds was there with her camera crew, documenting everything. By 1 p.m., the dam was completely gone and the creek was flowing freely again. I watched the water rush past, carrying away weeks of pent-up frustration along with the sediment and debris. Within an hour, my section of the creek was running clear and strong. I walked down to check on Tom, Karen, and Mike. Tom had moved everything valuable out of his basement and had fans running to dry out the seepage damage. Karen was in better shape, having caught the problem early. Mike's house was dark and his car was gone, which worried me. I was heading back home when I saw Susan sitting in her Mercedes in the empty community center parking lot. She wasn't crying, but she looked defeated in a way I'd never seen before. Against my better judgment, I walked over and tapped on her window. She rolled it down, her expression hollow. "Are you happy now?" she asked. "No, actually. I'm relieved the dam is gone, but I'm not happy about any of this. The county is billing the HOA $78,000 for the removal, plus fines of $1,000 per day retroactive to when we miss the deadline. Our lawyer says we might face criminal charges, and 3 homeowners have already filed notice of intent to sue for damages. I'm sorry it came to this." "No, you're not. You wanted me to fail." "Susan, I wanted you to follow the law. There's a difference." She looked at me for a long moment, then shook her head. You don't understand what it's like, being responsible for a whole community. Making decisions that affect everyone. Always being criticized, always being blamed when anything goes wrong. So don't be HOA president. Step down. Let someone else deal with it. And then what? I've given 6 years to this community. What do I have to show for it if I quit now? I didn't have an answer for that. We sat in silence for a moment, then Susan rolled up her window and drove away. Wednesday brought warmer weather and surging creek flows as the spring runoff kicked into high gear. The creek through my property was running high and fast, easily handling the increased water volume within its natural channel. I felt vindicated watching it, knowing I'd been right about the risks. But Wednesday afternoon also brought new problems. Tom Blackwell called me around 3 p.m., his voice panicked. "Scott, my basement is flooding. Water's coming up through the floor drain and seeping through the foundation walls. I don't understand. I thought removing the dam would fix this." I hurried down to his house and found him in his basement, standing in 3 inches of water that was steadily rising. His sump pump was running continuously but couldn't keep up with the inflow. When did this start? About an hour ago. The water just started coming up from nowhere. I looked around the basement, trying to understand what was happening. Then I noticed something strange. The water wasn't flowing toward the floor drain like it should. It was seeping up around the edges of the foundation, particularly on the uphill side of the house. "Tom, I need to check something. Stay here and keep an eye on the water level." I went outside and walked uphill from Tom's house, following the old creek bed. What I found made my stomach drop. The weeks that the dam had been in place had fundamentally changed how water moved through the area. The creek bed on the upper properties had filled with sediment and debris. When the dam was removed and the water started flowing again, it had carved new channels, and some of that water was now flowing underground through the soil instead of staying in the creek bed. The water table had risen significantly, and that groundwater was now finding its way into the basements of the downhill houses. I called Gary Thompson and explained what I was seeing. "I was afraid of this," Gary said. "The dam altered the hydrology of the whole area. Even with it gone, the damage is done. The raised water table won't drop immediately, and if the creek isn't flowing in its proper channel, you're going to have groundwater problems. What can be done? Short term, pumps and drainage. Long term, the creek channel needs to be restored and possibly improved. You might need French drains around affected foundations. This is expensive, specialized work." I went back to tell Tom. His wife Angela was there now, standing in the flooded basement looking like she wanted to murder someone. "We just remodeled this basement last year," she said. "New carpet, new drywall, built-in shelving, $40,000, and now this. I'm so sorry. This is the HOA's fault. They'll have to pay for the damages." "With what money?" Tom checked the HOA financials. "They have maybe $20,000 in reserves. They can't afford the county fines, much less basement repairs for multiple homes." She was right. I'd seen the HOA budget. We weren't a wealthy community, and Susan had spent aggressively on landscaping and aesthetic improvements over the years, keeping the reserves minimal. I helped Tom and Angela move their damaged belongings out of the basement, then went to check on Karen Chen and Mike Sullivan. Karen's basement was showing water too, though not as bad as Tom's. Mike's house was still dark and empty, which was increasingly concerning. Thursday morning, I woke to find a sheriff's car parked in front of Susan's house. I watched from my window as 2 deputies spoke with Susan at her door for about 20 minutes. When they left, I noticed they'd handed her some papers. My phone rang a few minutes later. It was Mike Pearson. The district attorney's office has filed criminal charges against Susan Carmichael and the HOA board members, he said. 3 counts of illegal water diversion, 1 count of creating a public hazard, and 1 count of failure to comply with lawful orders. They arrested her. Not yet. They issued a summons. She'll have to appear in court next week for arraignment. What about Linda and Patricia? They're charged too, but as lesser participants. Susan's looking at the most serious charges because she was the driving force behind the project. What kind of penalties are we talking about? Class 2 misdemeanor carries up to a year in jail and fines up to $5,000 per count. Realistically, if she's convicted, she's probably looking at probation, community service, and significant fines. But the civil liability is going to be much worse. He was right. By Friday, 4 homeowners had filed lawsuits against the HOA for flood damage. Tom Blackwell, Karen Chen, Mike Sullivan, who'd apparently returned to find his basement flooded with 6 inches of water, and surprisingly, David Martinez, whose basement hadn't flooded but whose property had suffered erosion damage from the altered creek flow. The combined damages being claimed exceeded $200,000. The HOA's insurance company sent a letter denying coverage because the dam construction violated policy terms regarding illegal activities. An emergency HOA meeting was called for Saturday. The attendance was even higher than the previous meeting, with nearly 60 homeowners packed into the community center. The mood was ugly. Susan stood at the front of the room looking pale and haggard. Linda and Patricia sat behind her, both clearly wishing they were anywhere else. "I'm sure you've all heard about the charges filed against the board," Susan began, her voice lacking its usual confidence. "I want to be clear that we acted in what we believed were the community's best interests. You broke the law," someone shouted. "You flooded our basements." Tom Blackwell stood up, shaking with anger. "My family has to live in a hotel while our house is remediate. My kids are sleeping on hotel beds and doing homework in a lobby because of you." "The flooding isn't directly caused by the dam," Susan said weakly. "The creek is flowing again." "But the damage is done," Gary Thompson said, standing. "The hydrology of the area has been altered. The water table is elevated. Even with the dam gone, the effects will persist for months, maybe longer. That's why we need to work together to fix this," Susan said. "We can hire contractors to restore the creek bed, install drainage systems, repair the damaged basements. The HOA will cover these costs." "With what money?" David Martinez called out. "The HOA is broke. You spent everything on landscaping projects, and now we're facing hundreds of thousands in liability. We'll do a special assessment. All homeowners will contribute." The room erupted in angry shouting. People weren't willing to pay for Susan's mistakes. Someone started circulating a petition to remove the entire board. Others demanded Susan's immediate resignation. I watched Susan as the community she'd tried to control for 6 years turned completely against her. Part of me felt vindicated. A larger part just felt sad for everyone involved. The meeting ended with no resolution, just more anger and finger-pointing. The board members left separately, avoiding the crowd. The following week brought the arraignment. I attended as a witness, sitting in the Boulder County Courthouse watching Susan, Linda, and Patricia stand before a judge and enter not guilty pleas. Their lawyer argued for dismissal based on lack of criminal intent, but the judge wasn't buying it. The defendants were repeatedly warned about the legal violations and chose to proceed anyway, the judge said. That demonstrates willful disregard for the law, not innocent mistake. Trial is set for June 15th. Defendants are released on personal recognizance. The civil lawsuits proceeded on a separate track. The HOA's lawyer, Richard Bradley, was clearly in over his head. In a deposition I gave in early April, he tried to argue that the homeowners had contributed to their own damages by not taking preventive measures. What preventive measures could they have taken? Mike Pearson asked. The HOA dammed their creek without notice. They had no reason to expect flooding. They could have improved their drainage, installed sump pumps, waterproofed their foundations. Some of them had those things. It wasn't enough because the HOA fundamentally altered the local hydrology. The deposition went poorly for the HOA, as did all the others. By late April, Richard Bradley was advising the board to settle. Meanwhile, the damaged creek and elevated water table continued causing problems. The county required a comprehensive hydrological assessment and restoration plan, which cost the HOA another $30,000 they didn't have. The assessment confirmed what Gary had predicted. The creek channel needed extensive restoration work, and several properties would require new drainage systems. Estimated cost, $150,000, not including the basement repairs. An emergency HOA vote was held to approve a special assessment of $3,000 per household to cover the costs. It failed by a landslide. Instead, homeowners voted to remove Susan, Linda, and Patricia from the board and install new leadership. The new board president was Gary Thompson, who'd reluctantly agreed to serve. His first act was to hire a competent lawyer and begin settlement negotiations with the damaged homeowners. "We can't afford to fight this in court," Gary told the community at his first board meeting. "Our only option is to settle for what we can afford, then work out payment plans. It's going to take years to dig out of this mess." By early May, settlement agreements had been reached with all 4 damaged homeowners. The total, $185,000, to be paid out over 10 years. The HOA would have to take out a loan secured against the common property. Monthly HOA dues increased from $75 to $225 to cover the loan payments, insurance increases, and required creek restoration work. Susan, Linda, and Patricia's criminal trial was held in mid-June. I testified about discovering the dam, the warnings I'd given, and Susan's refusal to remove it despite county orders. Gary Thompson testified about the engineering hazards. The county inspector and Division of Water Resources officials testified about the legal violations. The defense argued that the board members had relied on bad advice and hadn't intended to cause harm. The jury wasn't convinced. Susan was convicted on all counts. Linda and Patricia were convicted on the water diversion charges, but acquitted on the public hazard count. The jury apparently accepting that they'd been following Susan's lead rather than making independent decisions. At sentencing in July, Susan received 9 months in county jail, suspended to 2 years of probation, 400 hours of community service, and fines totaling $15,000. Linda and Patricia each got probation, community service, and smaller fines. The judge's comments during sentencing stuck with me. "Miss Carmichael, you held a position of trust in your community. People relied on you to make decisions in their best interests. Instead, you pursued a vanity project that you knew or should have known was illegal and dangerous. When authorities intervened, you chose defiance over compliance. Your actions caused significant property damage and put people at risk. This court takes that very seriously." Susan stood there taking the judgment without visible emotion. I wondered what she was thinking, whether she still believed she'd been right, or whether she'd finally understood the magnitude of her mistakes. The civil settlements included provisions that Susan, Linda and Patricia were personally liable for 20% of the total damages, roughly $37,000 each. Their homeowner's insurance denied coverage, meaning they'd be paying out of pocket for years. Susan put her house up for sale in August. The for sale sign went up on a Tuesday, and I watched the real estate agent taking photos of the property, marketing it to the next unsuspecting buyer who wouldn't know about the drama that had unfolded here. She moved out in September, and I never saw her again. I heard through neighborhood gossip that she'd relocated to Fort Collins, taken a job with a property management company. Starting over, I supposed, away from the community she'd tried to shape and ultimately destroyed her standing in. Linda and Patricia stayed in the neighborhood, keeping low profiles. Patricia resigned from the Architectural Review Committee. Linda stopped coming to HOA meetings. They paid their dues, kept their properties in compliance, and otherwise became invisible. The creek restoration project took most of the fall. A specialized contractor rebuilt the creek channel, installed proper drainage, and implemented erosion controls. The work was expensive and disruptive, but when it was finished, the creek flowed as it was supposed to, managing the spring runoff safely and effectively. Tom and Angela Blackwell's basement was fully restored by October. Karen Chen's repairs took less time, finished by September. Mike Sullivan's basement required the most extensive work due to water damage to his electrical system. But by November, his house was back to normal. The neighborhood slowly recovered, though the financial burden of the special assessments and increased dues strained many families. 2 households went into foreclosure, unable to afford the new payments. Another 3 sold and moved away. Gary Thompson proved to be a competent and cautious HOA president. He implemented new rules requiring board approval for any project over $5,000, mandatory legal review of any common area modifications, and regular financial audits. The kind of thing we should have had all along. I stayed in my house, watching the creek flow past my property through all 4 seasons. Spring runoff came and went without incident the following year, the creek handling the snowmelt easily within its restored channel. Sitting on my back deck one April evening, Rex beside me and a beer in my hand, I watched the water rush past and thought about everything that had happened. Susan's dam had lasted barely a month, but its consequences had rippled through the community for more than a year. 3 basements flooded, 4 families traumatized, hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages, criminal convictions, and a neighborhood torn apart. All because one person had decided a community pond was more important than water rights, engineering reality, and basic common sense. The legal settlements were structured to ensure the damaged homeowners were made whole, even if it took a decade. The creek was properly restored. The criminal justice system had held the responsible parties accountable. In the end, justice had been served, though it had come at a tremendous cost. Gary stopped by one evening in late April as I was grilling dinner, drawn by the smell of barbecue and the easy camaraderie we'd developed through the whole ordeal. "You ever wonder what Susan was thinking?" he asked, accepting the beer I offered him. "Like, at what point did she decide that her pond was worth all of this?" "I think she convinced herself she was right and everyone else was wrong," I said. "Once you're in that mindset, it's hard to see reality. Classic HOA president disease. I'm trying real hard not to catch it." "You're doing fine. The new drainage report looks good, by the way. Yeah, the creek should handle anything nature throws at it now, probably better than it was before all this started. Silver lining, I guess." We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the water flow past. The sun was setting behind the foothills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Rex chased a squirrel across the yard. Life in Willow Ridge was returning to something like normal, but we'd all learned hard lessons. About the importance of proper procedures, about the dangers of unchecked authority, about how quickly things can spiral out of control when people refuse to listen to reason. The final chapter of the saga came in May, almost exactly a year after Susan had been served with criminal charges. The HOA received notice that the Division of Water Resources had completed its investigation and was imposing additional fines totaling $12,000 for ongoing water rights violations during the period the dam was in place. Gary brought it up at the monthly HOA meeting, which I'd started attending regularly as a kind of insurance policy against future board overreach. "This is the last of it," Gary said, looking tired. "Once we pay this fine, we're current with all government agencies. The settlements with homeowners are on schedule. The creek restoration is complete and approved. We're finally done dealing with the dam disaster." The room was quiet. About 20 homeowners were present, a fraction of what had shown up during the height of the crisis, but enough to constitute a quorum. "How much is left in reserves after we pay this?" someone asked. "About $2,000, Gary said. "We're basically broke. But we're maintaining the payment schedule and we're not going to default. It'll just take time." "How much time?" "At current rates, assuming no major unexpected expenses, we'll be back to healthy reserves in about 7 years. 7 years. A long time to pay for one person's arrogance and poor judgment. But it was manageable. The neighborhood would survive. After the meeting, I walked home along the creek path, listening to the water move over rocks and around bends. The sound was soothing, eternal, a reminder that nature had its own rhythms that human beings ignored at their peril. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike Pearson. "Saw the news about the final fine. Glad this is finally wrapping up. You did good, Scott." A lot of people would have just ignored the problem or given up when it got tough. You stuck with it. I appreciated the sentiment, though I didn't feel particularly heroic. I just wanted my creek to flow properly and my neighbors to be safe. Basic stuff that shouldn't have required lawyers, county intervention, and criminal prosecutions. But Susan had made it complicated, and we'd all paid the price. The last time I thought about Susan Carmichael was a few months later in August, when I was sitting on my deck reading the newspaper. A small article buried in the local section caught my eye. A woman in Fort Collins had been elected president of her condominium association and was already butting heads with residents over proposed changes to guest parking rules. The woman's name was Susan Carmichael. I couldn't help but laugh, though it wasn't really funny. Some people never learned. They just moved on to new communities and made the same mistakes all over again, but that wasn't my problem anymore. I'd learned my own lessons from the experience, about standing up for what's right even when it's difficult, about the importance of community engagement, about how much damage one determined person could do with a little bit of authority and a lot of stubbornness. I'd also learned to appreciate my creek in a way I never had before. Every morning I'd walk Rex along its banks, checking the flow, watching the seasonal changes, noting the wildlife it supported. In winter, it ran clear and cold. In spring, it surged with snowmelt. In summer, it slowed to a gentle burble. In fall, the leaves fell into it and were carried away downstream. It was just a small creek, nothing special by Colorado standards. But it was mine, in the sense that it flowed through my property and connected me to the larger watershed, to the mountains above and the plains below. Susan's dam had tried to stop that connection, to trap the water and bend it to her vision of community improvement. But water doesn't care about human plans. It flows where physics and geology dictate, following the path of least resistance, wearing away obstacles through persistence and time. The dam had failed, as it always would have, because you can't permanently stop a creek with sandbags and clay. You can only delay the inevitable and cause damage in the process. Sitting there on my deck in the fading summer light, watching my creek flow past exactly as it had for thousands of years before humans built houses along its banks, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not victory exactly, because too many people had been hurt for it to feel like winning, but rightness. A sense that the world had been set back into proper order, that nature had reasserted itself over human folly, and that the community had learned from its mistakes and emerged stronger, if poorer and wiser. The creek flowed on, indifferent to human drama, carrying mountain snowmelt down to the plains, supporting fish and insects and birds, carving its patient path through soil and rock. It would be there long after I was gone, long after the houses of Willow Ridge had crumbled, long after anyone remembered Susan Carmichael and her disastrous community improvement project. That thought should have been humbling, but instead, I found it comforting. Some things were bigger than HOA politics and human egos. Some things just were, fundamental and unchanging, following laws older and more powerful than anything written in community bylaws. Rex nudged my hand with his nose, wanting attention or dinner or both. I scratched behind his ears and stood up, ready to go inside and make dinner, to continue the simple routines of life in a neighborhood that had been through hell and come out the other side. The creek would still be there tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Flowing past my property, connecting me to something larger than myself, a reminder that sometimes the simplest solution is to just let things flow as they're meant to flow. Susan never understood that. She'd wanted to control and improve and leave her mark. Instead, she'd left scars that would take years to heal and a cautionary tale that people would tell for years to come. I went inside, fed Rex, and made myself a simple dinner. Through the window, I could see the creek, catching the last rays of sunlight as it flowed past, eternal and indifferent, carrying away the last traces of a mistake that never should have been made. And life in Willow Ridge went on.